On the afternoon of July 30th, 1975, Jimmy Hoffa drove to a restaurant called the Machus Red Fox in Bloomfield Township, Michigan. He was meeting two men, Anthony Giacalone, a Detroit organized crime figure known as Tony Jack, and Anthony Provenzano, a New Jersey Teamsters official and member of the Genovese crime family known as Tony Pro. Hoffa arrived at 2:30 in the afternoon. He waited in the parking lot. He made a phone call to his wife, telling her the men had not arrived. And then he was gone. No witnesses saw him leave. No body was ever found. No charges were ever filed. No one was ever convicted. Jimmy Hoffa, the most powerful labor leader in American history, walked into a parking lot in suburban Michigan and ceased to exist. And 50 years later, nobody has been able to prove exactly what happened to him, though almost everyone who has investigated the case has a very good idea. Welcome back to Mysterious History, the channel where the official story is never the whole story. Today, we are covering one of the most enduring and most investigated cold cases in American history. A case that sits at the intersection of organized crime, political power, and the dark history of American labor. The disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa, a man who knew more dangerous secrets about more dangerous people than almost anyone else in America, and who paid for that knowledge with his life. James Riddle Hoffa was born in 1913 in Brazil, Indiana. His father died when he was 7. His family moved to Detroit. He left school at 14 to work. He discovered an ability that would define his life: the ability to organize people, to make them feel that someone was fighting for them, to turn individual grievances into collective power. At 19, he organized his first strike: grocery warehouse workers in Detroit, standing in the loading bay, refusing to unload trucks in the middle of a Michigan winter. They won, and Jimmy Hoffa never stopped winning. He rose through the International Brotherhood of Teamsters with extraordinary speed. The Teamsters represented truck drivers, and truck drivers moved everything: food, fuel, manufactured goods. If the Teamsters stopped working, America stopped. That was the power Jimmy Hoffa understood and wielded better than anyone. By 1957, he was president of the Teamsters, the most powerful union in the United States, with nearly 2 million members, and a pension fund worth hundreds of millions of dollars. A fund that would become the center of everything that followed. Hoffa's power was real, and it was used. He negotiated contracts that transformed the lives of American truck drivers, standardized wages across the industry, health benefits, pension rights, things that workers had never had before. For millions of working-class Americans, Jimmy Hoffa was a genuine hero, a man who fought the corporations and won. But the other side of Hoffa's power was something darker: the Teamsters Pension Fund, hundreds of millions of dollars held in trust for the union's members. In the 1950s and 1960s, that money flowed freely to organized crime figures across America. Las Vegas casinos were built with Teamsters money. Hotels, real estate, businesses of every kind, all funded through loans from the Teamsters Pension Fund, arranged by Hoffa and his associates. In return, the mob provided muscle when Hoffa needed it. Strikebreakers handled, difficult negotiations resolved, enemies discouraged. It was a symbiotic relationship of extraordinary reach, the most powerful labor leader in America and the most powerful criminal organizations in America operating in close and profitable partnership. Robert Kennedy, first as a Senate investigator and then as Attorney General, made destroying that partnership his personal mission. The war between Kennedy and Hoffa was one of the most consequential and personal feuds in American political history. Kennedy called Hoffa a cheap, vulgar, and dishonest man. Hoffa called Kennedy a spoiled brat who had never worked a day in his life. Both men were right about each other in their own way. Kennedy finally got Hoffa in 1964. Hoffa was convicted of jury tampering and pension fund fraud. He was sentenced to 13 years in federal prison. He fought the conviction for years. He lost. In 1967, Jimmy Hoffa went to prison. In December 1971, President Richard Nixon commuted Hoffa's sentence. Hoffa had served nearly 5 years. He was free. But the commutation came with a condition. Hoffa was prohibited from engaging in direct union management until 1980, a condition that Hoffa immediately began working to overturn, because Hoffa wanted his union back, and the people who now controlled it did not want to give it back. While Hoffa was in prison, the Teamsters had been run by his chosen successor, Frank Fitzsimmons. Fitzsimmons had developed his own relationships with organized crime, his own power base, his own arrangements, and the mob figures who benefited from those arrangements had no interest in seeing Hoffa return to power and disrupt them. Hoffa was fighting a legal battle to have his restriction removed. He was publicly announcing his intention to retake the Teamsters presidency. He was making enemies, powerful enemies, enemies who had made people disappear before. And then, on July the 30th, 1975, he drove to a restaurant in suburban Michigan to meet 2 of those enemies, and was never seen again. The FBI investigated Hoffa's disappearance for decades. The investigation produced an extraordinary amount of information about what likely happened, and almost none of it resulted in charges. The most credible theory, supported by multiple FBI informants and witnesses over the years, goes like this. Hoffa was lured to the Machus Red Fox under the pretense of a meeting. The Giacalone and Provenzano meeting was a setup. Neither man actually intended to meet him. They established alibis, placing them elsewhere. Hoffa was picked up in the parking lot by people he trusted. He was killed shortly after. His body was disposed of in a manner designed to ensure it would never be found. Over the decades, dozens of specific locations have been suggested for Hoffa's remains. A New Jersey landfill, a horse farm in Michigan, the end zone of Giants Stadium in New Jersey, a field in Oakland County, Michigan, a house in Detroit. Each theory has generated searches, some extensive, some using ground-penetrating radar, some involving significant excavation. None have found any trace of Jimmy Hoffa. The most widely credited account among investigators is that Hoffa was killed by a Detroit organized crime figure named Richard Kuklinski, known as the Iceman, a contract killer who later confessed to numerous murders in interviews conducted after his arrest on separate charges. Kuklinski claimed to have killed Hoffa and disposed of the body in a manner that would ensure it was never recovered. He died in prison in 2006, taking whatever he knew with him. The disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa raises questions that go beyond a single cold case. It opens a window into a period of American history when the boundaries between legitimate power and organized crime were extraordinarily blurred. The Teamsters Pension Fund financed Las Vegas. Organized crime figures attended the same fundraisers as senators and presidents. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, had spent decades insisting that the American Mafia did not exist. While the American Mafia consolidated its power and embedded itself into the financial and political structures of the country. Jimmy Hoffa understood that world better than almost anyone. He had operated inside it for decades. He knew where the money went. He knew whose names were on the accounts. He knew which politicians had received which payments. He knew which law enforcement officials had looked the other way and why. That knowledge was his power, and ultimately his death sentence. Because when he started threatening to use that knowledge to retake the Teamsters, the people who feared what he knew decided it was safer if he could not tell anyone. The case has never been officially solved. The FBI still carries it as an open investigation. Every few years, a new tip generates a new search, a new excavation, a new round of headlines, and then silence again. Jimmy Hoffa is still out there somewhere, in a landfill or a field or beneath a building that has long since been demolished, in a place that the people who put him there chose very carefully, knowing that if they chose well enough, he would never be found. They appear to have chosen well. Jimmy Hoffa built his power by fighting for the working people of America. He won battles for millions of truck drivers that improved their lives and their families' lives. He also corrupted the institutions he led, partnered with criminals, and ultimately became a man whose enemies found it safer and simpler to make him disappear. He was 62 years old. He had grandchildren. He had plans. He had a union he wanted back. And he walked into a parking lot in Michigan on a summer afternoon and never walked out. The most powerful labor leader in American history disappeared by people who were never charged, who were never convicted, who in many cases died peacefully in their beds, while Jimmy Hoffa remains wherever they put him, still missing, still officially unsolved, still one of the most enduring mysteries in American criminal history. Subscribe to Mysterious History for new mysteries every week. The official story is never the whole story. Coming up next on Mysterious History, 500,000 Americans are dead. It did not happen by accident. Pharmaceutical companies knew their products were dangerously addictive. They sold them anyway. They paid doctors to prescribe them. They lobbied regulators to look away. And the family that made $11 billion from the crisis faced no criminal charges. The truth about the opioid epidemic. Next week on Mysterious History.